I'm Luca Giliberti, contributing writer for Gold Derby, and I'm joined today by Richard Jenkins to talk about his role as Lionel Dahmer on Netflix's Dahmer Monster, the Jeffrey Dahmer story. And Richard, before we get into the show, your role, and everything else, I'd be very interested to hear how much you knew about Jeffrey Dahmer and his crimes before you signed on to the show, and what sort of your memories are of that time when everything was going down.
Well, I knew about him like everybody else knew about him. I didn't know specifics of
Mhm.
what he did, how he did. I mean, the guy who ate people. I mean, that's basically what everybody talked about. So I didn't know that much about
Mhm.
him.
Yeah, that I feel like that's most people's experience before watching the show. I mean, there have been many projects about him, but I feel like this show goes in depth on so many different aspects of his life, the environment in which his crimes were allowed to happen, and I think that's why this show has struck such a chord with viewers, wouldn't you say?
I think so. I mean, that's why it interested me that you just oh, the fact that this went on a lot longer than it needed to go on. It should have been stopped earlier. And you just see the reverberations of these acts, how it's like the stone in the water, the ripples just keep going and going and going. The
Exactly.
families and his family and all of the pain and misery he caused.
Yeah, absolutely. And I believe that you had read about three scripts before you signed on to the show. So I believe you had, I guess you had some insight into Lionel before you signed on. But after you signed on, what was some of the additional research that you did in order to prepare for this role? Did you read his book, Lionel's book, A Father's Story, or what were some of the other sources you made use of to sort of understand who this guy was and what his mindset was and his headspace and so on and so forth?
Well, I did. Yes, I read A Father's Story immediately. But if it's not in the text
Mhm.
that you're working with, it doesn't really matter. I mean, you may wish it was there, but if it isn't there, it's like there's no way to put that, and there's no way to live that. So, but I thought they really did. They found um, they found a father's story in this mini series, that. And I say this all the time about Lionel, but this is what really made me want to play it, is that the thought kept coming back to me, as if Jeffrey Dahmer's your son, you stop loving him, and that's kind of, you know no, you don't. And that's Lionel's, he so um that this is a father's story is an honest attempt to kind of recall what he remembered, and maybe it's a cautionary tale to other parents, to what to look out for, how to, maybe this will help if I tell my story. So
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. He even says that on the show, doesn't he? He said he wanted it to be a cautionary tale. So I think it's interesting that you mentioned that. And I had read that one question, if you're Jeffrey Dahmer's father, do you continue loving him after, you've learned of all these crimes he's committed, that's one of the main reasons you signed on to the show. And what I'd be really curious about is at one point you were able to sort of find a definitive answer to that question. Was that immediately? Was it while you were doing your research and going through all the scripts, or was it not until you had the opportunity to walk around in his shoes for quite a bit that you were sort of able to answer that question?
well, I mean, when you read his book, I mean, he's a human being. I mean, he's complicated like everybody else, and that's one of the things I loved about it, is that he in the text, in the script that we had, he's about five different things, which is
Right.
so human, and is what we all are. But you don't usually see that in television and movies. It's usually just you're one thing. You're either the long-suffering father, or the jerk father. Yeah, I mean, you can be. Then everybody can say, well, that's where it came from. Oh, that's why he's that way. Oh, this is why. But
Hmm.
life is not that simple,
No.
and that's one of the things I loved about um, the script. But I knew early on from reading the text, and that if I had read that and found that his father didn't love him or didn't care about him, or I wouldn't have done it. I don't think. I think because I mean, it may have been a conclusion you come to after you do it, but I thought that was such an important element, and I really got that after I read the book. Was and you ask yourself that question. I have a son.
Yeah.
And yeah, I have children, and I don't care what they did. I don't, you can't, you don't stop loving them. That's part of the deal, and so when Ryan first asked me to do it, I went, oh God.
I understand that. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I read it. He said, well, just read these 3 episodes. And I read it, and it was enough for me to say, oh my gosh, this is really interesting. I'd like to see what happens here. So.
Yeah, and I like that you mentioned that, he's sort of 5 different things at the same time, and that, like you said, humans are complicated. And what we see throughout the season, or throughout this first season, in the present day timeline at least, is that Lionel, as one would expect, at first he kind of looks for someone else or something else to blame for what happened. Yeah, I mean, he cites everything from the hernia operation that Jeffrey had at the age of 4 to the medication that his first wife, Joyce, was taking while she was pregnant. So how and why do you think he's ultimately able to arrive at a place where he can admit partial blame and take responsibility for some of the mistakes he made with Jeffrey?
I think it's a journey like anything else. I mean, you exhaust all the other options, and then if you're halfway honest, you look at yourself, and it's something he didn't want to do. I don't think any of us would want to. And even now, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Well, I guess my best answer is it was a journey, and he finally pushed himself into a corner, and he had to face what he really subconsciously knew all the time, that whether it's true or not, he thought that he was the issue. And and then that may have changed later on. I don't know, but we continue to change and move and grow and morph. But I mean, I understand that. I get that. If unless you're a sociopath or a narcissist, I mean, it's got to come back to you somehow. I wasn't there for him. I didn't do anything to help this kid. He tried to tell me what was going on, and I don't want to hear it. Now that's enough to blame yourself. If you can recall those moments, and he does, where his son, and the fear was his son was going to tell him that he was gay. And that's what the father feared more than anything else. But his son was trying to tell him that something's wrong with me. I have these fantasies, and it's scary. And as he says in the miniseries, I didn't want to hear it.
Yeah. And to that point, in the first episode, when he's called into the police station, where he sort of learns of, all the crimes that Jeffrey has committed, and they tell him that they found multiple items in his house and that he committed multiple murders. The first thing that Lionel inquires about is the multiple items, which I thought was very interesting. And that sort of goes back to what you were saying, is that he didn't want to confront the fact that his son is gay. And I think even at the end of the show, once he has admitted some blame and taken some responsibility, I feel like the part about his sexuality, I think a lot is left unsaid still, which I found really fascinating.
Absolutely. I mean, it's something Lionel didn't want to talk about, just, and I mean, who knows what, I don't know. I mean, it's just that here's a father, and in that time, what was the year that I'm trying to think,
when he was
when
arrested, it was 1991.
1991, yeah. I mean, so it's just, I don't know. I don't know. Does the father ever talk about it in A Father's Story? I can't remember. does he talk about his son being gay? He doesn't really, does. I mean, he talks about it, but does he say, that's what I didn't want to hear it because of that? I don't know. I don't know. I don't remember. He does. He certainly says it in the movie, which I think is really wonderful. And it's better than having somebody else say it about you.
Right.
If you can say, this was my mistake. I did this. And yet, I mean, no, they never really talked about his son's sexuality. No.
Right. And don't you also think that his second wife, Sherry, is also a big reason why he's ultimately able to admit some blame and take some responsibility and also do it to his son's face? Because if you think about it, it's opposite her that we really see him display some vulnerability, especially in the 8th episode when he talks about, some of the fantasies he had during his childhood. And it's sort of not until after that we see him be vulnerable in front of Jeffrey. So do you think she had an influence on everything as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think, how much of in life is true, I don't know because I am lived a life, but in this teleplay, in this screen, yes. And it doesn't hurt that Molly Ringwald played her. Because I mean, there's empathy in Molly, Molly, no matter, she's just, she just heard everything that Lionel said to her. She took it in. Yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm so grateful that she played this role because she's fabulous in it. And it made it a lot easier for me.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned her because we're going to get to her in just a second. But I really loved all those scenes between Lionel and Sherry for all the reasons that you mentioned. And don't you also believe that Sherry is also one of the reasons why he's able to sort of move on after Jeffrey is killed? Because at the end, Joyce is still kind of seemingly looking for someone to blame. I mean, she's the one who's on board with Jeffrey's brain being studied, whereas Lionel is the one who says, we got to move on now. Do you think he would have been able to do that or been of that same mindset had Sherry not been in his life at that point?
No, I don't. She was his therapist, really. I mean, he really opened up to her about things, and I don't even know if he intended to. It's kind of who she was, and I don't know if he'd ever felt that comfortable before in his life. So it seems that I mean, from playing it, I always felt that she would understand what I said to her.
Yeah. And that's go ahead.
No, that's it.
Yeah, I mean, that's absolutely the sense you get of, in their scenes together. And I just felt like they added so much more. They added so much to the show. And I like that, like I said, I like that you already mentioned Molly Ringwald, because I do want to talk about some of your scene partners, especially, starting with the women with whom you share a great portion of your screen time, Penelope Ann Miller, who plays Joyce, Molly Ringwald, who plays Sherry, and then last but not least, the legendary Michael Learned, who plays your on-screen mother, Catherine Dahmer. So just talk a little bit about getting to play opposite these three extraordinary actors.
Well, it's nice to live a fairly long life because you get a chance to work with a lot of different people. And I never thought that I would be married to Molly Ringwald. I mean, that was, and so it was cool. I mean, they were all fabulous. They were just really wonderful. I was a friend of Ralph Waite's. I knew Ralph. And so Michael and I had a connection through that. And it was great. I mean, I'm not that much younger than Michael Lerner. So.
Right. You joked about, yeah, right.
Yeah. So anyway, it was a trip. It's always a trip to I feel like somebody who comes up to you and goes, "Oh my gosh, oh my gosh, you're Michael Lerner." Yeah. It was fun. It was, fun. There's a weird shoot to say it was fun, but if you find the work exhilarating and difficult, and that's what I mean by fun, in the sense that it was hard, but it was rewarding. And that again goes back to the writing. The writing was just, I think, it was just terrific.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And don't they always say when your scene partners are also, you know, in addition to the script being great, when your scene partners are great, that your job just becomes so much easier
Yeah, of
as
course.
an actor. So
Absolutely. And you know, they're all three wonderful actresses. And you know, it was fun. I mean, it was it was good. It was really good. Penelope Ann Miller is terrific in this.
mhm.
She is really terrific. And again, a character that's searching
Yes.
for something to you know, hang on to for the rest of her life, you know, so as opposed to being just Jeffrey Dahmer's mother
Mhm.
for the rest of your life, because that's who you are. You know, you're still Jeffrey Dahmer's father. And,
Absolutely.
you know, so, but yeah, they were all, there was great. It was great.
Yeah, that's great to hear. And then I do want to talk about one other scene partner, obviously Evan Peters, who plays Jeffrey. And from what I understand, had a very specific process during shooting where he wasn't necessarily in character between takes, but he was still very much in his element. I believe Niecy Nash-Betts, who plays Glenda Cleveland, said that she didn't really meet the real Evan until after you were finished shooting. But you know, given that you have to portray this father-son relationship and how it evolves over the course of almost 20 years, you know, did you have any conversations with Evan before you started shooting about what you wanted that dynamic to look like, or did both of you just sort of go for it?
Well, no, we didn't talk about that.
Mhm.
But you know, if you talk about something, then you have to do it. And sometimes when you say, okay, well, this is what I said, so I'm going to have to do that now, and it
Right.
may not be what is required at the time. So I try not to talk about something that I try not to make decisions too early. I guess that's what I would say. But you know, I was his dad.
Mhm.
I wasn't one of those other. I was his father, and so yeah, I talked to him off camera on purpose because
Mhm.
he was
Of course.
different with me. He was different with me than he was with everybody else. Um, and I felt it when I did it, but when I saw it, that's when I really said, okay, yeah, he's different with his dad, and which I think was necessary, absolutely necessary, because he wasn't the Jeffrey Dahmer you saw all the time. I mean, he wasn't what we think of as Jeffrey Dahmer all the time.
Right. Right.
He
Right.
he
Right.
he was a son at some time. He was a confused son who tried to please his father,
Mhm.
who tried, you know, when he got the new apartment and the fish tank, and he said he stopped drinking, and he said, you know, he, well, I don't know how hard he tried, but his father thought he was trying, and so it was important, and so that relationship was important enough for Jeffrey and Evan, who is really brilliant. I mean, he's a brilliant actor, and he's got great instincts. If he, you know, he's got great. His instinct was to. I was his dad, you
Mhm.
know, and he wasn't. He was. He wasn't the same with me. He was.
Right.
He was more like a son. Yeah.
Yeah. That makes complete sense. I talked to Evan or interviewed him last year for Mayor of Easttown, and I find his process so interesting, and it makes complete sense that he would open up more to you than maybe to other people. But yeah, you both did such a great job, and so many of your scenes are just absolutely devastating. That relationship and the way it evolves, or in some ways doesn't evolve, is just yeah, very devastating to watch. But I fear we're out of time, Richard. But thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today, for all your insight. It was incredible to listen to. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.